some of you also know me as one of the sharks from last night, so, I had put away my shark teeth, and they also gave me the most complicated, hardest words that I can pronounce today. There's only the cities that Christine Baes had traveled to get her education. So Christine Baes was born and raised on a dairy farm in southwestern Ontario and learned to appreciate Canadian agriculture at a young age. After completing her bachelor's degree at Guelph, she went to finish a Master's of Science in Animal Welfare at the University of Oppenheim, and a PhD in quantitative genetics at the Leibniz Institute for Farm Animal Biology at the Christian Alberts University in Germany. She became involved in various large-scale livestock breeding projects, swine, horses, dairy, cattle, and goats, and together with her team, strives to bridge the gap between cutting-edge research and practical application of new knowledge. Dr. Baes has extensive knowledge in areas of quantitative genetics and statistical genomics as it relates to the genomic evaluation of livestock. Dr. Baes has taught multiple courses in genetics, genomics, and statistics in Germany, Switzerland, and Canada. In her spare time, she runs a small farm outside of Hill, Ontario. So, turn it over to Dr. Baes.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? All right, I'm gonna be started with some confusion because I didn't know what the title of my talk was. So I switched a couple of times and switch brochure you look at, but I like this one a little bit better, but it's the same as the resilient one. So how do you take into two breeding cows for fertility, disease, tolerance, and efficiency? And I want to give a shout out to my friends from Southern Indiana, where I have Jason, Nick, Chris. They gave me a lesson on hats last night that I would say that blew my mind. So I'm learning a lot here too. And they told me that I wasn't really very funny, but I could talk about anything. So we'll do that. I'll do my best. So how many of you are thinking about hearing about methane and cattle? How many of you think that it's a ridiculous argument in the first place? That agriculture is not really responsible for all of this stuff? It's a little tough, right? But when we look at the numbers, we can see this is greenhouse gases by Canadian economic sector, and what you can see here is that agriculture is probably about 10% of Canadian greenhouse gas emissions. Of that, when we break it down, we've got 68 megatons of CO2 equivalents. Livestock are about half of that, and dairy is about a third of that. So in total, we're talking about, for dairy cattle in Canada, 1.2% of the emissions in Canada are caused by dairy cattle. Now, that's maybe a big deal, it's maybe not a big deal, but what happens is that when we look at individual cows, we can see, when we measure them, about 492 grams a day is produced by a lactating dairy cow. That's about a pound methane a day. And we're like, okay, that's not a big deal, but when you have millions of cows, which we don't in Canada, but you guys do, there's a bit of methane. Okay, deal with that. Now, when you start to look at how much variation is there between individual cows, how many people think that methane production is a genetic trait? How many people say that's not true? Okay, you guys already know everything. There's about 30% variation between individual animals. So that means that indeed there is some ability to be able to select for animals that produce less methane, which is pretty good news for us because we can tell a really good story if we handle this properly. I was talking to Chris last night from Southern Indiana, and he told me that methane production represents a loss of energy, which is true too. But we'll talk more about that later on. Overall, the Canadian dairy industry has said we want to achieve dairy net zero by 2050. And in all honesty, they have no idea how they're going to do that. Like, not at all. So we think that there's probably quite a few ways of achieving this pretty hard goal to reach. And one of those ways is genetic selection. Now that we've seen that there's genetic variation, we've seen Oh.
Oh,
We've seen that there's genetic variation, we've seen that we can measure it, so now we've got to figure out how to get your slides on the screen. We're trying to figure out what we can do, how do we set this up so that we can measure enough cows and that we can actually, attack this problem on time. So what we've done is we started kind of looking at environmental traits a long time ago. And we do have one thing that you guys don't have in the beef industry, and that's mirror data. Anybody who's ever heard of mirror data? Troy, Nick? So mirror data is mid-infrared spectroscopy data. We'll talk more about that later, but it's from the milk. Take a milk sample and shine light through it. Anyway, what we've done in Canada, we started a few years ago. Oh, there we go. We started a few years ago collecting this spectral data. So we made a pipeline for data collection from PHI, which is dairy herd improvement. We can see that we've got a lot of cows stored, so almost 90% of our animals, when they get a milk sample taken, we store that, we use that, and that was a really important decision back then. There was kind of no clear path forward for that, but it turned out to be really useful, and I'll talk about why. Then in 2014, we had a really big project, $10 million or something, for collecting feed efficiency and methane data. The sole purpose of that project was just to collect data, basically. We made some fancy stuff up for the funding agency, but really it was another part. Then in 2018, we wanted to keep collecting data, but we couldn't talk to the funding agency and say we wanted to report the same thing, so we called this the Resilient Dairy Genome Project. And it was good because we got a really good deal with the local for this project, because it's pretty much exactly the same as the Efficient Dairy Genome Project. It was great. But here we wanted to say, okay, we've got to pull in really additional phenotypes, not just efficiency phenotypes or methane phenotypes. Here we have to actually think about what the implications are of these traits on other traits, which is really important as well. So we did that. That was another huge project. Then we started a few regional initiatives where we're putting sniffer equipment to measure methane. So individual in milking robotic milking systems, you can actually install equipment that sniffs. It's kind of a weird thing. If anyone's interested, I'll show you. But it just sniffs constantly, and we get a lot of methane data for really cheap. So those green feeds that we heard so much about yesterday, they're like, I don't know, 100 grand, at least 100 grand Canadian, which is like $7 US. No, it's a lot, right? Green feeds are really expensive, sniffers are a lot less. So we're planning on installing those sniffers on commercial farms right across the country. And we're lucky enough to get another big project called the Dairy Net Zero project, where we are planning on developing a roadmap for mitigation of greenhouse gases, and hopefully we'll get that as part of the Canadian inventory for greenhouse gases, and that will be the way that we should go. And on top of that, of course, since 2013, there have been multiple projects for genotyping cows with medium to high density chicks. Now, 4,500 cows doesn't sound like a lot to you guys, but to us, in Canada, when we have a herd of less than 1 million cows milking, that's a pretty good number. $8 dollars, so that's a good way to go. So dairy resiliency research, I'm going to talk about what a resilient animal is, and I think this is something that we can actually probably feel, whether or not you're a meat producer or a dairy producer. This is our definition of what a resilient animal should be. Animal able to adapt rapidly to changing conditions without compromising its productivity, health, or fertility, while becoming resource efficient and reducing its environmental burden. There's a saying in Germany, and I was going to put a picture that I figured was kind of weird. They talk about an egg-laying wool milk cow. Anybody ever heard that before? It's like an animal that can do everything, right? An egg-laying wool milk sow. It doesn't exist, but that's kind of what we're looking for. And And that's why the title of this talk is about having your cake and eating it too, because all of these things we're asking really a lot from our animals. But that's okay, because there are ways to achieve this. So we've got this fancy project that's running right now. And it's got a couple different components. So the first 3 activities are based on collecting phenotypes. Really, really good phenotypes. Like closer to biology fertility traits. I heard that term yesterday. I like it a lot because it's really important. The second part is enhancing disease resistance. I think we can all agree that's pretty important too. And the final one is improving efficiency and reducing the amount of abuse. So the engine of this project is focused on bringing that information into a central database, using it to understand the genomic and environmental relationships between those different traits. And also, we've got this Stacy guy in Quebec, excuse me, Steph McCain knows him very well. He's trying to do some epigenomics stuff. And I know Steph is talking about epigenomics today. That's above my pay grade. It's way too hard for me, but it's pretty cool stuff. With our Genome Canada funder, we're actually forced to do something called GELS. So GELS is GEEELS. It's a terrible acronym. Stands for Genomics and Ethical, Environmental, Economic, Legal, and Societal Aspects. So we've got this social science part of our project, which you might scoff at first. But this is actually part of the project that has really challenged the scientists most, because what we do really matters to everybody else and to all the people who might buy milk or buy products later on. And it is really important to have to think about what that means, what our research means, and what direction we decide to go in, because that does have implications for the greater public. Not even consumers, because the public might contain people who don't even buy the product. So we have to think about those people as well. And this has been a challenge, but also a positive challenge, working with the GELS people. Then, of course, no project is good without translation and implementation, so we want to have this stuff applied and in the hands of producers so that they can make money and produce better cows. So the first activity in this project is focused on closer to biology fertility. It's being run by Dr. Ronaldo Seri of the University of British Columbia, and he's aiming. Right? He's aiming to standardize new phenotypes based on sensor data. How many beef cattle producers have like any kind of sensors for activity on their female animals for beef detection? There are a few, right? See one? How many of you think that's crazy? Nobody thinks it's crazy stuff. You're not going to get beaten up after this talk or anything, but it's a possibility, right? If you want to get closer to the biology of the animal, I'm sorry, but things like days open, you may as well breed for the producer as opposed to breeding for the cow. That was a joke, but that's okay. You may as well like breed for the producer instead of the cow because it's impossible. Days open, all the traits that we have currently in dairy are kind of useless. We can do better than that. So when we start using automated sensors, we start seeing really cool things like, for example, this is a graph of the distribution of pregnancy losses according to the relative increase in activity during estrus. So on the x-axis here, you've got a relative increase of activity. So on your right-hand side are the animals that are really active, and they lose their pregnancies less. Okay, than the animals that are not active during the heat. Some of you might say, okay, we knew that. Here's a graph showing increased pregnancy per embryo transfer. So the animals that have a high activity, they get pregnant more than the animals that don't have high activity during their period. Here's a graph showing increased percentage of viable embryos. So those that have high estrus expression actually produce more viable embryos. And finally, we've got a graph here showing reduced estrus expression results in more failed ovulations. So all of these things kind of point towards the connection, the biological connection between the traits that you can measure automatically and actual cows. which is cool. On a side note, we've got a really good PhD student in Guelph named Alex, she's shown here. She's looking at anogenital distance. And this has actually quite a few, so it's the distance between the clitoris and the anus, and it has favorable correlations with a lot of positive reproductive outcomes. It's also pretty easy to measure. And interestingly enough, but I'm going to get to my fancy next slide here. I think the heritability of this trait is at 39%, which is like a real trait, right? Like it's pretty good. Okay, the correlation with actual fertility might not be so fantastic, but it's pretty cool. You can measure that, and it's got a good heritability, and we've got a pretty good reliability, right? We're just starting to apply the information on it. So that's pretty cool. Then, enhanced disease risk is also important, I think, for beef cattle as well. We've implemented a fertility disorder genetic evaluation in 2020, and we've got a bunch of really active PhD and master's students who are working on developing methods for routine phenotyping. And this is, for example, the rate of diarrhea and respiratory disease on Canadian farms. What you can see by the lines, not the bars, but the lines show you that there are more and more farms actually collecting this information, which is fantastic. So phenotypes are really, really important. But we can also see, this is a table showing the heritability of metabolizable energy intake in calves at 1 month and 2 months of age. Heritability, I mean, my master's student did it, so it could be wrong. But heritability is 32%, which is pretty good, right? Even if he's wrong by half, it's still 15%, which is fantastic. Then we had work done on glucoses, trying to find potential cancer genes. That was work done by Aisha Bong and Ray Bongers. And then also, I don't know if you guys got cramping in beef cattle. It's a pretty nasty disease problem in dairy cattle where they stand up and they shake. It's a neuromuscular disorder. It's not really very nice. But even the heritability for that trait is at 9%, which is also not enough. Feed efficiency and methane emissions. This is work done together with a colleague at LACNet who unfortunately passed away 6 weeks ago. Dr. Eric Kistenhofer was a really good member of our team, but he is no longer with us. But we're very grateful to have been able to work with him as well. He was very fun. Enlarging the reference population is the goal here for feed efficiency and methane emissions. Feed efficiency, the goal is to have 17,000 records, and the goal is to have just under 8,000 records for methane emissions. And of course here, I'll talk more about this, but we have a really fantastic collaboration here between a number of groups. What we can see is that the US has really a lot of feed efficiency measurements on individual cows. We're at 15,782 as of the last release. But the Spanish group that we work with is actually the leader in the number of methane emission records collected. And of course, each country individually doesn't have that many records, but together, when we collaborate nicely, we do have a no last call policy, so there's that too, but we have a lot of great work being done here, and we're together, we're stronger. Activity 4 is based on looking at the genomic and environmental relationships between all of these different traits. This is being run by Dr. Flavio Schenkel at the University of Guelph. He's doing a lot of really fancy statistical stuff on this. And we've seen a few things in that feed efficiency is dynamic over the course of the lactation. And we're also looking at temperature and humidity index for heat stress. Believe it or not, even in Canada, we have heat stress for actually quite a considerable amount of the summertime. So this is work that's coming out of Flavio's group. We have our fantastic but also very complicated researcher in Quebec, Martin Gerard, doing work on multi-generational effects and epigenetics. He's also working with Roger Q there. And he'd like to understand this transgenerational effects of what happens when you do something to the dam. What's the effect on the daughter? So his preliminary results show that 1.3 kilograms of energy per active milk gain, you can gain that much if you wait and breed your cows a little later. So that's against pretty much everything that the vets are telling us to get. And I mean, the grazing situation is a little different. You do have to get your cows in calf, but this is pretty interesting stuff. He's also done some whole genome bisulfite sequencing on healthy and unhealthy animals, and he's looking at differences to find epigenetic markers that could eventually be used for selection purposes. Dr. Paul Stothard is our brain behind the whole database stuff. He's made some pretty cool visualization software, so he can actually, you can go onto his website and you can find parts of the genome that are actually associated with some of these traits. So it's kind of like a map, which is pretty cool because you see all these papers and all these publications about all this stuff, but it's really only when you start to get into the visualization of it that you actually can say, oh, this is the part that is really interesting. Or, oh, this is the part that you don't want to have passed on to the next generation. So he's doing some pretty cool stuff too. And again, here is our GELS activity, this genomics and its ethical, environmental, economic, legal, and societal aspects. This is done by Dr. Jason Riley and Dr. Ellen Carter from Alberta. And they ask kind of funky questions just to the general public. So here's, they ask the question, if selective breeding could be used to solve the environmental impacts of the dairy industry in Canada, do you think that you would be happy? Now, that's kind of a loaded question. You might be talking to people who are never happy, no matter what they do. But, you know, almost 50% of these people said yes, which is, I think, a pretty positive message, right? I mean, I think the people who said no just won't be happy anyway, so you can't really help them. But the ones who said, you know, unsure, maybe those are the ones that we need to talk to and do some communication with. So this is really interesting work that could, in fact, be fed back into the rest of the project and how we move ahead with implementing these traits. Then finally, activity 8 is translation and implementation. We've been quite good actually at implementing these things. You know, normally researchers are like, give us your money and then we'll never see you again kind of thing. We'll write 7 publications that nobody will read. That's not the case here. We try to really make sure that we have things that are turned into reality. So LACNet, because of this research, they were able to implement genetic evaluation for fertility disorders in 2020, for feed efficiency in 2021, for methane emissions in 2023, and for body maintenance requirements also in 2023. And now we're working on modernizing the lifetime performance index, which is the index that they use in Canada for selecting animals. So this is kind of a chart. At the last, we have a research oversight committee. They tell us what to do. They told us there are too many traits. We need to kind of make a table. So we made a table of all the things that we're working on. And I heard a lot of people talking about less traits, but we have a lot of traits in Canada. We've got, I think, 67 at the moment, and we're just working on more. Now, I'm starting to make a deal with the boss of LACNet, who's in charge of this stuff. I'm like, I'm not going to give you any more traits until you take some away. But I don't think the list is very much to me. So anyway, this is our list, and this is where we're at. It's pretty good, I think. And more importantly for me as a scientist, we have produced scientific output. And every scientist is a little bit cocky sometimes, we have to brag a little bit. This is who I love to brag about. These are the people who have been trained through this project, and I'm so grateful to all of them. There's an additional probably 78 undergraduate students who have for the past 7, 8 years traveled to the research station every day, 3 times a day, and collected data on methane. So when you guys have, a great growth rate in your cattle, that's one thing. But for us, this is what we're after. So these students, technicians, postdocs, researchers are going to be part of the industry, and that's kind of our output as well. And I'm so proud of each and every one. And of course, there has to be an economic aspect of all of this as well. And here we've listed out kind of the genetic gain, the monetary genetic gain that can be achieved before genomics. And you can look just at that center column there, you can see the benefit per cow per year. And these are estimates, of course, but I think what you can really glean out of this table is that genomics and the adoption of genomics, and then later research, when we start to apply the greenhouse gas mitigation, we're going to be at probably a benefit of $148 per cow per year, which is real, right? That's a real benefit, and it doesn't actually cost that much. So, from research to implementation, I'm going to talk very briefly about genomic selection for methane. And now I'm going to talk about this mirror stuff, right? We say mirror, we mean mid-infrared spectroscopy data. Really, technicians go out to farms, they collect little milk samples, they take them back to the lab, they shine light through them, and they get this weird graphical pattern, basically. And from that, the plan is to estimate or predict how much methane an individual cow produces. So you can imagine it's not so hard for a dairy industry to collect this information, but it's really hard for a beef industry to collect this. I don't know, somebody told me, Indiana guys told me that somebody's milking beef cows. Somewhere? Anywhere? In Oklahoma, I never they know what's the title in there, but they say that they're milking beef cows in Oklahoma. Who knows what else they do in Oklahoma? So we've got mirror data that we've collected on a lot of dairy cows, and we did a study a few years ago looking at these mirror spectra, so these different wavelengths of light shone through milk. We had 241 spectral data points. So there's like thousands. There's really a lot of spectral data points that you can use. We reduced it down to 241 of them. Then we collected average daily methane from 496 cows from two different herds between 5 and 205 days in milk. And what we saw in that study was that we could actually accurately predict the amount of methane produced by these cows with a prediction accuracy of 0.7, which that kind of blew our minds, right? That was pretty good. Then we looked at the genetic correlation between these traits, and we saw a genetic correlation of 0.92. And then I have to say we passed it on to LabNet, and they ran with it for the national evaluations. Because right now in Canada, as I mentioned earlier, we have this mirror data on about 90% of our cows. So it's like a no-brainer to use this mirror data, predict your methane from it, and select for methane based on pretty accurate predictions of how much methane your animals are going to produce. And what we got, this is our wee tiny data set. I feel like it's pretty big for Canada, but I feel like a little dwarf here in the States because you know you guys have like 10 times the number of cows, but still, with this data set, we're pretty confident that we can select for reduced methane. And that's why since 2023, we've had a national evaluation in Canada that's up and running, and they're actively selecting for reduced methane. And then you might say, well, shit, does it really work? Like, kind of tough. What we did here is, so there's a difference. I want to make an exclamation mark here, a quotation mark to say that methane production is not methane efficiency. Okay, so we've got a production rate that is just grams per day, basically, of methane. And when we looked at animals, at the average predicted expected methane production by EBB class, we can see that the blue line here is the predicted methane, and the orange bar is the actual methane. So that was the first test on our own animals, right? We have animals that we've measured. We can predict their methane. Is it the same thing? Looks pretty good to me. Then we figured, well, that's not really fair. And everybody John was throwing us shade about not doing good math and stuff, so we read in the papers, and we got a different data set from Italy. So this was data published in 2019 by Wallace et al. They looked at different measurements of methane, for example, chambers, green feed, and sniffers. And because we used green feed machines for our data, we looked at the Italian green feed data. And we said, can we borrow your data for a minute? And they said, sure. So we ran those data points through our evaluation system, basically. We actually estimated methane efficiency evaluations for these Italian animals. So a totally relatively unrelated data set. Now remember, here we're talking about methane efficiency, so low is bad and high is good. So this is the recorded methane by relative green value class in lactation 1 animals from 120 to 185 days of milk. And again, in the high group, there's still a bit of questionable results, but generally speaking, these evaluations look pretty good. So we're moving ahead with them. Now, the data used in the Canadian National Genetic Evaluation looks more like this. We started with 241 spectra from 496 cows. Now we're at 501,000 cows, and that's increasing on a daily basis. So methane efficiency is not methane production, but methane efficiency is a trait that has been developed to be independent of production traits. So when we looked at the correlations between methane efficiency and a bunch of other important traits like protein and fat and milk production and mastitis resistance and even feed efficiency, interestingly enough, here, we can see that there are small correlations. So we've tried to make sure that for sure for the production traits, those correlations are very small. But they're, interestingly enough, if we consider anything less, any correlation that's less than 0.2, you can kind of not ignore, but it's not really very strong. So we've seen that there are actually only positive effects here on health and fertility, and here on metabolic disease resistance. And interestingly enough, selection for feed efficiency does not also improve methane efficiency. And that's something that I have been told to producers for like a year before doing this. And I was so wrong. So this is my confession, if you will. It's not the case. Really interesting. You have to figure this out. But both of these traits have been designed to be independent of production traits. But feed efficiency on its own will not improve methane. Interesting. So we're going to have to keep doing our research and figuring out why that is. But that's what we know so far. So the interpretation of this evaluation is that a 5-point increase in a sire's RBV for methane efficiency, in that case, daughters are expected to produce 3 kilos of methane less per year. That's like 6 pounds. 7? A lot. 7 pounds. 7 pounds. There we go. I'm not good at math. That's why I'm a professor. 1.5% decrease in methane emissions per cow per year, meaning that herd owners selecting methane efficiency can indeed achieve 20 to 30% of that 50% decrease that the bloody dairy farmers of Canada signed up for without anybody else knowing. So together, if we can think about working with the nutritionists, which we don't like to do, for instance, Southern Indiana, maybe we can get down to 50% reduction by 2050 as the organizations have promised. Now, LabNet has, they're really toting this genetic toolbox for sustainability traits. And what we've seen is that they're really working towards reducing or increasing feed efficiency, improving body maintenance requirements in dairy, but also reducing methane emissions. And they have also agreed to modernize their lifetime performance index. Now, you guys might look at this as beef cattle producers can say, what the heck are they doing? So many traits. But that's kind of the Canadian way of doing things. You do have a lot of traits, and there are new traits being developed every day. And we have a really good system. The benefit of being small is that you can do these things, right? You can have really, really high quality phenotypes collected across the entire population, or at least most of them, which is kind of fun for scientists. But we've seen here for the sustainability of greenhouse gas emission sub-index of LPI, which is the lifetime performance index. That's where you see the traits like methane efficiency, feed efficiency, fertilize, and body maintenance requirements. So the future strategy, if I want to keep my job, I have to think about more projects. So that's what I do, right? So we're just looking right now, our evaluation focused on first lactation of cows between 120 and 185 days in milk. And that's pretty limited. I admit that. But we have goals. It's good to have goals. We want to enhance our milk year predictions. We want to increase the number of records that we have. As I mentioned earlier, we're going to be installing these methane skimmers on up to 65 robotic herds across the country. We're going to include a little bit of diversity in our collection methodology, including New Jersey and Ayrshire. We want to have data on multiple parodies, on full lactations, and with different feeding advantages. And we want to improve our genetic evaluation. So with this, we have started a new project. That's this is the team. This is the core team. There's a bunch of other people who are involved. But you'll see, I think the one person that I should highlight here is Doug McDonald. And he's the section head from Environment and Climate Change Canada. So he's a government guy that somehow we convinced to be on our projects because he's actually responsible for sending the inventory to the UN. And that's who you need on your projects because that's who's actually passing the numbers on. And anybody who knows about the IPCC regulations and all of this kind of garbage, they don't really, sorry, nutritionists, but they don't know how to do math, right? Like, they're sending these numbers out and they're not even real. So we figured we should just jump in right where you need to jump in, get these guys on board, get them involved, and figure it out, basically. And I think that is a pretty good strategy. I hope. We'll see how it goes. I told them also we have a last policy, so I don't know. Anyway, this is the project plan here. We have the climate smart. This was interdisciplinary challenge team is what the funding agency, Canada, calls it. The goals here are to consolidate existing methane emission data, and this actually includes beef. So our focus is clearly on dairy, but if there is any way to work with additional beef partners, we will do that. Have partners, Steve Miller in Australia has provided or will provide a data set. John Berry has a beef on dairy animals in Ireland, which he will contribute as well. We've got data in Canada, and I'm working on trying to get his data as well. And we can work together and figure out how to benefit both groups of producers possibly with this type of research, because we're pretty far ahead, in all honesty, in the dairy industry. We've got a fantastic infrastructure, and there is a ton of benefit, I think, that can be applied to the beef industry. And then there's all these other goals, but really the main thing is that we want to estimate animal and bird level emissions. We want to improve our genomic evaluations, and we would really ultimately we want to develop a roadmap for methane mitigation. The brutal thing about this project is that they told us we have to do it in a portfolio context. Whenever anybody talks about portfolios, it's a pain in the butt. But this project is one of 8 other projects in Canada that have been funded, and we're supposed to actually build in docking stations to this project, which will then allow information to flow from other projects into our project and from our project out. And I have no idea how that's going to work, but I made this nice graphic with little plugs that's supposed to represent data flowing in from, for example, plant soils and ruminant data. But in particular, what I do think is probably useful is microbiome samples coming in. So that we'll be able to integrate anybody with rumen microbiome samples that might have an actual effect on methane emissions. And if we have more data, then maybe we can actually figure out how to incorporate that into applied breeding programs, not just publications. Yeah. So I'm pretty excited about this project. And I'm pretty excited about the partnerships that we have set up with these other groups. We want to have methane data on an additional 16,000 dairy cows, an additional 13,000 meat and beef on dairy cows as well. So we've got a lot of partners here, and it's going to be awesome. Final remarks, these national, international, interdisciplinary, and multidisciplinary collaborations are super important. But it is really important to pick your partners carefully. Dairy cattle resiliency is a top priority in Canada, but it requires really a lot of high quality phenotypes. We're working on fertility, health, and efficiency. The deliverables of this research really shape the industry. So find your local researcher, give them a hug and work on, drink a beer together or go out and talk to each other, because if there is a disconnect between what academia is doing and what producers are doing and what the industry is doing, we're all going to be in trouble. And we're going to have troubles with our beautiful industry, whatever that industry may be. But if it's an agricultural industry, I probably like it. The potential application of dairy results for beef might be really interesting. I hope to be able to report in a few years how fantastic this worked out, but we'll work on it first, and if anybody is interested in collaboration, please do let me know. And finally, teamwork really does make the dream work, and that means more cake for everybody. And with that, I'd like to acknowledge all of our funders, all of the organizations who have funded this, but also the fantastic team of people that I work with. Thank you so much.
All right, we'll open up the floor. If you guys have any questions, I'll run the mic to you guys. Any questions?
So how are you measuring, feed efficiency?
We're measuring feed efficiency with incentive bins right now. So incentive bins means we've got a bin in front of the cow. We measure literally every day the intake of that animal. Actual feed intake, we use body weight, we use energy corrected milk, and we use metabolic body weight, energy corrected milk, stature, and actual weight of feed intake. So real measurements. I know a lot of organizations use kind of an approximation for feed intake, but we're measuring.
Thank you.
Good morning, great presentation on what the Canadian Seminole Association, we haven't met yet, but we will.
Okay.
So really interesting, and I know there's people, and especially our producers, that shoulder shrug and, you know, we do a great job. But here's the message that I'd like people to consider. Through my position, I also sit on the Canadian Roundtable of Sustainable Beef in their meetings, not on the board. The messaging that comes out of the dairy sector, at the producer level, LAC and AHI, whoever, is that basically that calf that comes out of the cow is free. There's no methane attributed to that because they produce milk. That's a bonus and a byproduct. So those are the things that we're competing with perceptionally from the consumer and everything else, but probably more so at the government. So whoever's here with your state and regional organizations and whatnot, let's keep that in mind and focus on some of these things when we do our research. Thanks.
Thank you, and I think that this can only benefit everybody, right? Like, if we work, it doesn't mean, just because I work with the dairy industry, doesn't mean that we shouldn't work with other industries as well. It's the positive message, right? Of course, we all know it's forced dumb, this whole conversation about methane, but we do see variation, we can change it, and we can send out a very positive message, as opposed to the kid who's crying and saying this is so unfair, right? Let's just roll up our sleeves, figure it out, and deal with it so that we can move forward.
All right, let's give her a big round of applause.